Sure. Yep.
Is that okay? Okay. Okay, that means you have to do that, I think, Shannon.
I did, right after everybody said okay.
Okay, awesome. All right, and I see Oriana is joining, which is great. Yeah. Well, so we had asked, since you got right into the conversation about like how to get more resources into the workforce, so that they actually have some kind of salary commensurate or bonus commensurate with the risk they're taking during COVID. But then in general, it's a larger question about the importance of organizing the workforce, and that's something that you guys are all working on. We thought it would be interesting to have Matthew talk, and he agreed, because they have won hazard pay in New Mexico at a level that is quite significant, and a national leader in that. So we thought he could maybe kick off a little bit about the background of, you know, what they are working on, Olay's background, the kind of partners that they work with, and then tell us the story of how they identified this as a priority and what they did. So Matthew, would you like to take over?
Sure.
And tell things.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. Well, so as I think most of you know, Olay's been organizing around childcare for 10 years now. Started organizing parents and early educators and providers together with this vision of building a sort of unified movement of the three different interest groups. And we've had our ups and downs with that, but we recently had done some really good organizing of childcare workers using some of our digital strategies, but it was really kicked off by a really old school sort of organizing move where organizers went to the community college, found friendly professors who would give them access to their childcare classes. And so they immediately tapped into these classes of childcare providers who were earning associate's degrees, who were really terrific and wanted to fight for higher wages. And so, as I mentioned, we did this bill during our last session, which didn't go anywhere. But when the pandemic hit, our members were immediately talking about their exposure and the risk that they were taking, and their desire to fight for hazard pay. And we, of course, sort of thought it might be winnable, thought it was a shot at the dark, but thought that no matter what happened, it would really advance this fight that we're going to continue to have to raise wages for childcare workers. And since we actually won, that sort of morphed into this idea of, since we won the hazard pay, let's now shift the fight to making this the new normal. And the hazard pay basically, if you sort of break it down by an hourly rate, with an educator's current wages, the hazard pay, which is $700 per month, that basically gets them to like $15 an hour total with the combined. So it just gets them to roughly where we think they should be already, at least for someone starting out who doesn't have a lot of experience or a lot of education or other things that would move them up a pay scale. You may have heard me talk before about how we, at the end of last year, inherited a new cabinet secretary for early education, the first in the state, who we stole from DC, who's really accomplished and has been a major player in all the victories in DC. So we knew we had a sympathetic target. We knew we had a sympathetic governor who, as soon as the pandemic hit, announced a number of provisions that were good for parents in terms of childcare. So we essentially just organized Zoom meetings. The members made a very aggressive ask. I think they asked for $2,500 a month. You know, we had a lot of conversation about whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. But it certainly wasn't an overreach. The secretary didn't blink when they said this number. And literally 3 weeks after making the ask, the new policy was announced and we won it. And, you know, in conversations with the secretary, it was clear that she was taking this emergency CCDBG funding. I think for New Mexico, it was something like $27 million. And, you know, we were really, quite honestly, pretty much accidentally making the ask early enough without really realizing that we were, so that we were making the ask before the money had already been sort of carved up. A lot of it already had, of course, but the secretary basically did the math and figured out this is what they could afford from the remaining funds that they hadn't already committed. In an earlier conversation, she had talked about a little bit more, something that would have amounted to more like $1,000 a month. You know, we're of course all depressed that more federal money at the moment doesn't seem to be headed our way for child care relief. But I think we certainly learned this lesson that, you know, down the road, if there are other pots of money that come for childcare, we really need to be right at the front of the line saying how it should be divvied up, whether it's for workers or for parents or whatnot. You know, this is all new, and certainly the providers are being pretty aggressive in fighting for the money, and so we need to make sure all these different constituencies are being heard and making ambitious asks. One sort of downside about our win is that it's only good for 3 months. So it's just for April, May, and June. So there is going to be this cliff at the end of June, and providers or educators are already agitated about it. And of course, there aren't really obvious pots of money that we can fight for to continue the hazard pay beyond June. But, you know, I think we're all sort of in this boat with the current conflicts going on, the, you know, upcoming end of the federal unemployment insurance, the continued unemployment down the road. I really see a lot of all of these fights we're involved in kind of starting to converge later in the summer. And I don't know what that really means, but I think that's the question that we're talking about here, and I'd love to hear what any of you all think about how we marshal this convergence of really catastrophic stuff happening all at once. So maybe I'll just stop there for now, Rachel. You're on mute still.
I have double mute here. Thank you. I don't even know what kind of brain to describe I have now with just all this going on. But so thank you. There's a couple things you said that I think are interesting to point out as maybe differences from like the long-term struggle, right? There is money available coming suddenly from the feds. You only had to go to the administrator to get the decision made. So, but you also talked about, so other people, you'll probably all have questions too. And I just want to, so why don't you, does anyone have something right now that they want to ask or comment on or reply to Matthew's? He left it with a good open question of sort of like, what now? because we know this money is running out, and we know that there's larger economic injustice and racial injustice conversations going on right now. Where have people been thinking about this issue of how the workforce organizing fits into that,
Rachel, can I
or
ask
have
a
things going on in
clarifying
their state?
question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. I mean, actually, I know this call isn't for me, but I was so fascinated by this, so I might send Matthew questions later. You mentioned providers, and I think that when you mention providers, you're talking about providers separate from workers. You're talking about institutional providers, and I think that that's kind of a very interesting concept. That if I heard you right, it's a little different than the way we've thought about in the past, right? Like direct worker support, and if the providers are in line and the workers are in line for the same pot of money, like that's a dynamic I don't know that we've like lifted up or heard about before. Can you just say a little bit, did I get that right? And can you say a little bit about that? Because that might indicate something about future analysis of the way we look at these things.
Yeah. This really crystallized for us last year when our governor, without sort of letting us know, basically they took some money to get pre-K teachers' wages up to public school kindergarten teachers' wages. So in New Mexico, you have pre-K happening both in public schools and at private centers along with traditional childcare. So this was money that was given to the private centers just to get only the pre-K teachers' wages up to parity with public school teachers. Well, what we found was that one of our longest leaders got the money and it was life-changing. And most of the other teachers we reached out to didn't. And we brought this to, this was the first conversation we had with our new secretary that this was going on and that providers were actually, we felt, committing fraud because they were supposed to provide the department a budget that reflected the increased wages they were providing. So they were providing budgets to CYFD showing that they were paying higher wages even when they were not. But the money had already gone out. The department wasn't interested in like having this fight with providers about clawing back money they'd already spent on remodeling a classroom or something else. So it was just clear that when we were demanding hazard pay, that right up front with our demand was this money can't go to the employer, it has to go straight to the worker. Which is more complicated than it sounds, particularly in New Mexico. Because of our long history of corruption, we have something in our Constitution called the Anti-Donation Clause that basically says the government can't just give a chunk of money to an individual or a particular business. So basically, the secretary had to figure out how to use the existing scholarship fund that was for early educators and basically route the money in the form of scholarships to deliver the hazard pay directly to the workers. But she totally got it, particularly after our earlier conversation about how the pre-K bonuses were misused. She totally got it and realized, yeah, that she had to figure this out and not send it through the provider. It would be a real mess.
Matthew, I always had that question too, because you used the word providers, like that the providers had been advocating, but were you talking about home-based childcare, family business owner providers, or who were your allies in going for, talking about this need for direct pay?
We actually, it was so fast and furious, we didn't really organize allies around supporting our ask. We certainly had friends who were aware of it, and NACI came out in support of it, and others. But we really think we just sort of, well, for starters, we were the only group that were having dozens of teachers meet face-to-face, digitally face-to-face with the secretary. Everyone else who was talking to her we're policy wonks or advocates. And when I say providers, I really mean the owners of private childcare centers. No, home-based providers were not weighing in unless they were weighing in through us. Some of our educators who were part of the fight have their own home-based centers, I guess you'd call them. So yeah, sorry about the confusion of all the names.
Well, that's just the nature of our field, I think, of doing this work. Is the words are different. So, but you have members who are home-based, like they own a family, like
Yes.
they're a small business and they're part of your group. And what happened here was that NACI and your group aligned. Also, you had already established a relationship with the secretary. Like as soon as she came in, you started doing those town halls with her. And so, okay. Do others have reactions or questions, or just thinking about how the workforce dynamic works in your own states that you want to add into the conversation?
Hi, it's Mary. I joined a little late. I apologize. Matthew, I have a couple questions and a comment. One is, I'm still not clear. Did family child care providers also get these income supports? This hazard pay? Is that a
Yeah.
Waiving? Okay. And you also just said that it was also private center-based owners. So it wasn't just child care centers who have a contract with the state and serve children of low-income families. This was also private owners who serve the general public.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think the comment that you mentioned around the challenges with getting donations, or however you describe that, we were facing that in California as well. We had $50 million to distribute PPE supplies to childcare providers, and one of the biggest hurdles was to not then consider it as income, where then they would have to pay taxes on it, and then that took a bureaucratic long period of time to just figure that out. So the agencies couldn't even distribute the supplies until they worked that out, and I don't even know what the final solution was, or if it was just waiving of that, having to collect 1099 forms and that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to raise that also as an issue.
Yeah.
So will the money that these folks receive through hazard pay be taxed then? Be considered? That's actually a question I hadn't thought of. Considered like a income?
I forget where we landed with that, but I can find that out for you. I know that they took care to make sure that it wouldn't impact their Medicaid eligibility, but I'm not sure about the tax question.
Okay. So one thing that you mentioned that I would love to follow up on is that, we're in this chicken and egg thing where we are trying to win the 50 billion or more, would be great too, at the federal level, and we need to have a sense of how that money could be used and what difference it would make at the same time. So it'd be really helpful to have state leaders stepping up and saying to Congress, we need this, but at the same time, I think state leaders are afraid, at least administrators are just saying, look, the money's running out. If they don't have the money in hand, they're not very innovative. I've observed this before. So to what extent, what do you think about is there anything going on, Matthew, to think about how to extend this? You mentioned that as part of what you were thinking, and to start advocating for that or fleshing that out with an eye toward potentially more money coming later, and being able to make the case for how that would help in your state? Or where are you at with thinking about that? We've as a group talked before about how the things you guys are doing in states relate to what the people at the national level are talking about, and vice versa.
We've got a lot of strategies, but none of them will deliver millions of dollars by July 1st. They're all long-term strategies, going after the billions in our land grant permanent fund, going after money in our severance tax fund. There are pots of monies lying around, but in the case of the first one, we have to pass a constitutional amendment in order to access it for early education. So we've got strategies, but we've got no clear answers of how to extend the hazard pay immediately after the end of June, unless it's, recycling some unused money to keep it going another month, but nothing that'll really sustain it. And that's where I think we are, we sort of feel like the problem is so huge with so many low-wage workers that I think the solution is going to have to be in a much broader fight, because all of our communities are just going to be super broke. They're already broke, but they're going to be just like flat out cashless by some point this summer. So I think we need to figure out how to combine forces, but I don't really have specific strategy beyond that.
I can share some stuff that's happening in California. Our governor proposed some cuts that are attached to whether or not the federal dollars come in by July 1st. And so obviously that's not going to happen. And so, well, I'm presuming it's not going to happen. So the Senate and the Assembly have kind of come together on a plan that basically says we are not going to implement these proposed cuts. We are going to move the sort of date to October 1st, which gives kind of a larger window for the federal dollars to come in. And they're presuming the federal dollars are going to come in, and our legislature and the governor have done joint letters and had conversations. They have a lobbyist in DC. The Assembly has a lobbyist in DC. So they're definitely like really spending time thinking about how to get as much federal money as possible. So should the federal dollars come in by October 1st, then they have a positive trigger plan, which takes the money that we would get in CCDBG and determines like how we will spend it when it arrives. And that all includes both access as well as rate increases. Oh my gosh, everywhere I go, there's either loud noises outside. Sorry, trying to find a spot that's not loud. Okay, so sorry. So yeah, so it's a positive trigger. So that's been really exciting to work with the Legislative Women's Caucus and members of the legislature to think about how to use these dollars the way we want to use these dollars, and everyone's on board. I mean, it was really shocking that the governor proposed a 10% reimbursement rate cut at a time when we're depending on these providers in ways that are unbelievable. And it was just really I don't know what they were thinking. So that's been wholly rejected by the legislature. So we're pretty sure that's going to be protected. And there's also money for, it's not called hazard pay in the positive trigger. It's called hazard pay, but in this, it's money that would go to providers who are open, as kind of an incentive or as a recognition, acknowledgement of the heavy burden they're carrying. What we haven't figured out is how to address private programs who are obviously hurting. And I just don't know if, the subsidized programs and the programs that are serving low-income children are just too much, that it's trying to figure out something for private pay providers has not, we haven't figured it out yet. I think there's an effort probably in the positive trigger proposal to figure out how to get some supports to them, but right now we haven't figured that out.
Thanks, Mary. Have others been doing more work, federal facing work that they want to talk about, or talk more, to make this sort of connection between what you've been doing at the state level and what's going on at the federal level? I know California is rare in that they have a lobbyist, like the governor's office actually has a lobbyist sitting in DC who does that kind of work, and New York has that too. Anything else folks want to say in reaction to what the story Mary shared?
We have been doing regional meetings with Senator Schumer's office in particular, and we've also been trying to put together some town halls with some of our Congress representatives, some of the representatives there. But the issue we're facing in New York is that the governor has been sitting on the child care specific money, the CARES money, only gave out 30 million of the 164 that was supposed to go to child care, and has not given any other out. So it becomes difficult to go back to the federal delegation and the federal government saying we need more money when we haven't gotten this yet. And this is where the push now is concentrated in New York, in the childcare community, to push the governor and the legislature, well, the governor actually, and the Department of Division of Budget to give out the money before we're able, while at the same time talking about how incredibly necessary it is to have not only the $7 billion that was included in the HEROES Act, but 50. That's really what we need nationwide. So that's where we're at provider-wise.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Marina, and what is their sort of rationale for why they haven't distributed?
Well, since New York is really the first state that actually completes its budget for next year, our budget is done by April 1. So in the middle of this pandemic, we had to complete a budget, and the governor and New York in particular is facing an increasing budget deficit as the year goes on. So they are holding on to the money, any money that they have, not giving anything out in hopes that the federal government will act. And that's why Cuomo has been going back and forth meeting with Trump in Congress. But that's really their rationale. They currently froze any payments to contracts that CCR and ours have affecting subsidies. They froze $1 billion right now. So it's it's a bit of a cluster here. But that's how they're thinking about it. That because we have 15 billion in a budget deficit for right now and going into next year, they kind of stopped everything, see what the federal government is going to do, and advocates are between a rock and a hard place here. So we keep pushing. We keep pushing and raising things up, but it's not. See where he gets.
And the supplanting, the not supplanting but supplementing isn't working because it's federal dollars, so they can't. It's not connected to state dollars.
Well, so for childcare, yes. There's. Well, I guess if they're not giving it out, they're not supplanting anything or supplementing anything. They're just holding on to it. It's not like we've been raising that up too. In the pre-K world, K-12 world, the language around supplanting was loose. The maintenance of effort there was a 3-year average, so that allowed them to make a cut, a $1 billion cut, and backfill it with the CARES money. So.
The other strategy we were going to use, we didn't need to because he ended up finally spending it, but your region, we're region 9, I don't know what region you are, but your sort of federal childcare person in your region could sort of ask questions to your lead agency, how are you spending the CARES money? Where have those dollars gone? So at least the lead agency is being held kind of accountable. I don't know how far that gets, but at least it just sort of.
Do you have that contact, Marina? You're in region 2.
Okay, no, I don't. And actually, I haven't heard any of the other advocates talking about that either. Well, I should ask. Region 2, you said, Shannon?
Mm-hmm. You're in region 2, and we could send you contact information. Rachel, you could send Marina contact information for region 2. I think
it might be turning over.
I don't know the orientation of this administration. I mean, when I was the federal person, I literally had state child care administrators call me up for off-the-record conversations, and we would try to figure out like what I could do or ask that they could then take to the finance department, especially in California where the finance department runs everything. Right? Like, I'd be like, what if I ask you this? What if I ask you for this documentation? What could I put in a letter? Like we would like work together on it, but I don't know that kind of thing is happening now.
I mean, honestly, the Division of Budget runs everything in New York too.
Yeah, that's like our Department of Finance. It might be Elaine Zimmerman. Might be your person.
For regions?
Yeah,
she's region 1.
Oh,
yeah, she's
region 1.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. I think the person who was the OCC person there might have turned over recently, but let me look into that. But that is a strategy. I mean, it's interesting because the new legislation that's being filed today for the 50 federally has reporting in it, which the other didn't really have, where they say you have to report back on how you spent the money and more accountability. So it certainly doesn't help us get that new 50 they want to be not spending the money they have, because that is a concern of the federal. It's obviously something that's been raised at the federal level, that they put in more accountability on the new money. So yeah, so that, I mean, Schumer's office could ask about it too, but I don't know that you want to raise it to them. I mean, are they upset? Are they aware? And
they are aware, I think, but the senator and the governor are not on very good terms. They are very much, at odds. So I don't know.
So something you said was making me think about this in a different way. I was kind of curious, like some of you have said to me before that you need to do a little bit of stepping back. It's hard to step back. We're all in crisis mode now. And to think about who some of allies could be to help make more of a case for the workforce and other things in your state. And I know, Matthew, you said before that there are pretty large entities in the state that haven't been supportive of your wages efforts in the past, and you just mentioned it before too. So maybe that's something we should talk about, is like how, in this case, you didn't have to get them to be on board so much because you got to work right with Elizabeth, who's your secretary. But are there things we should be talking about around how you neutralize or get stronger allies when you're talking about the needs of the workforce? And if that's not a helpful conversation, I just thought that might be interesting, because I've heard it in other states too, where you're surprised that someone like an entity that you think would be on your side isn't in this. Does that happen with the providers or any other groups in your state?
Well, the biggest opponent is the Child Care Association, which is part of the National Child Care Association, the NMCCEA, which just is culturally very conservative and has a sort of history in New Mexico of aligning with right-wingers and despite all their talk about their concerns about wages, they, for example, came out and opposed our bill, even though it wouldn't have cost providers anything. This was about increasing the amount of money that the state was devoting to child care workers, and they opposed it. I don't think there's any way of changing them. I think it's just got to be old-fashioned organizing. There are a lot more workers than there are owners of private child care centers, and so they've got to be organized and speaking out. And the NMCC or NMAEYC used to be sort of aligned with the Child Care Association, but recently had a change in leadership, so they're much more sort of aligned with us now. So we certainly have strong allies who are with us on wages, not just NACI, but others as well. So I really think it's just about the politics and the strategy. The reason I was reluctant about doing the call today is because today is our primary day, our primary election, and our C4 is hopefully going to unseat some of the Senate Democrats that have stood in the way of some of the larger child care funding proposals we've had over the years. So, we have a whole nother C4 strategy to change the political environment in New Mexico. But we're stumped on short-term solutions.
I see someone else has joined, and I'm curious who that is because I don't see a name.
Hi, this is Janae McDonald. I'm a part of the Common Start Coalition led by Coalition for Social Justice.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Joy. I just didn't recognize your number. Thank you for joining.
No problem.
Matthew, I was wondering, what's your bill number that the association opposed, and then what's the name of the association?
The NMCCEA, the New Mexico Child Care Education Association. Hold on a second, I can give you the bill number. I'll put it in the chat when I find it.
Okay, well, Jordan, let us know if you have anything you wanted to discuss today. We're sort of running low on time now, but Danielle, oh, you asked your question, so I didn't want to. Okay, you asked your question. I just want to get to the larger question you raised, Matthew, which is like, given everything that's going on, the unrest, the need for big sweeping social change now, what is the best strategy? I mean, we have obviously supported your groups to work specifically on behalf of childcare and access to equitable childcare, which is one of the things that is, holding folks back, obviously, in the economic analysis. But what is it time to just think about? Are you thinking about trying to join with a larger group that's just focused on wages for workers who are making less than $15 an hour? Is it, what is people often accuse the early childhood and education group of not having like a simple slogan or a simple push for one thing. I'm just wondering what you guys are thinking about that, just to throw it over.
I mean, we are the babies, I think, of this group and on this issue. So we have ideas, but then we definitely want to talk to other people about it. But we just, we say that it's the triangle, right? Like we have to be advocating for all three, the providers, the teachers, and the parents, and we're the parents. But as we're starting our own childcare in our office, we are just seeing how horrible the system is. And we're like, how do we create a system that's not so fucking hard to get into? Like, it shouldn't be this difficult. And we shouldn't have to have all this money before we even do anything and then lose money if we don't, it's just like, it doesn't make sense. So we're playing with an idea around, and Oriana had to get off because she was on that call. Like, what if there was an entity that like totally subsidized the whole process? And would that make it easier to pay people good wages? Would it because it's the profit margin that is the problem for why, not for everybody, but why people are not getting paid well. So if we were eliminating all of the stuff that lead people to have a smaller profit margin and making it it easier for them to compete against those huge childcare facilities. And again, we don't know if we're just like, we're very new to this, all of this. So in the meantime, we're advocating for the small things, and, and wages is definitely something that we just have to, because those are our moms. But then we're just like, what does reform look like? Is yes, we are definitely having that conversation.
I am fascinated, Danielle, and I think that you would have such a valuable perspective on it from trying to do both sides. Like, I just want to say, I would love to hear what your learning is, and then also if there's anything that Rachel or I can do from our perspective, I haven't been in a while, to like connect you up with other people. Not that we have answers, because if we did, it would all be fixed, but like, to be able to kind of connect what your experiences are with other things that have happened. But when you say, if you could sweep away some things that are getting in the way, like, can you just say a few words? And the other thing that strikes me about what you're doing, which is very different, is you're saying like wages for our moms, our workers, are the first, it's like the big rocks in the jar and everything else is small. And that's like the flip of what we always do, which is say like, well, these safety standards or whatever, which I believe in safety, is the big rock in the jar, and it always squeezes out the wages. So I think that even that conceptual flip of like the wages are the big rocks is an interesting one. But can you say a little more about what you would be sweeping away?
Well, I mean, okay, so we work in our office, and it's the most convenient. It helps with productivity and just comfort if our children are there, right? So what makes the most sense? To have childcare where we are. So we got a building that is large enough to have childcare and us work there and in proximity. Then it's like, okay, how do we make this place a childcare? And again, we could be doing it backwards, but I'm pretty sure we're not the only ones, right? Like, and so, okay, let's start getting our stuff together to get licensed. Okay, we need to have all of our inspections. Inspections cost money. We've got some cash. Okay, let's do the inspections. Okay, if you don't pass this inspection, you can't go on to your next inspection. There's no way of knowing the lead content before we rent the building, because we're not doing a lead test on a building that we haven't rented. And it's like, how do we make the place that we chose safe enough for children, as opposed to finding the place that is, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? I don't, so again, there's a little bit of shame, like, did we do it right? We might've just done it really wrong. But, COVID happened right before we failed our lead test, but didn't fail. So we're not going on to our fire inspection until we fix the lead issue. And the lead issue is like outside, which not everybody even knows that, right? Like it's an outside thing. It's not an inside thing. And it's like, so that's where, so if we could, if there was an entity that was like, we're going to help you through this process, or like, I don't know, I'm sure there are, but we didn't know them. And so just making all of that easier, or like a loan to go with it that's insured or something like
that. That's one short-term thing I'm thinking about is, no one is talking about helping workers. Everyone's talking about helping small businesses. There's definitely going to be small business money coming. Is there a way to either build in something that greases the skids for the money to come to providers, but also ties some standards to it around wages? Or could you do this sort of service organizing kind of thing where you're helping providers get the money as long as they commit to X, Y, and Z? Or just thinking about having your eyes on that for the next spot for your own center?
Yeah.
I don't know. Excuse me, you guys, I have to get off in just a second.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Matthew. We really appreciate you making time today and leading off the conversation. I just want to say that the $50 billion, the bills that are getting filed, I mean, I know that they're not the full and final answer, but they do have direct payments to providers to help them replace parent pay is part of the provision. And it also talks about the importance of getting money actually to the workers. So people are hearing you at the federal level. It's just a matter of, there's a lot more work to do, but I just wanted you to know that those issues are being heard and people are trying to get them into the legislation at the federal level. Okay, does anyone have a last word? We have to let Matthew go, but
thanks. Good
anyone
to see
else
you all.
have anything to share? For everything you do, continue to do, you can shoot questions, or like if you have a research policy question that you're not getting answered elsewhere, feel free to shoot it to me and I can try to help locate information on it. Matthew actually did that when he was putting together the hazard pay proposal. He was asking me, what are other states doing? So you can always do that. And we'll try our best to help you out with the policy side. We know you have the organization side down. And we just, stay strong. Thank you for everything you're doing. And we will continue to try to be responsive to needs. So if you have things like, I really want to talk to other people about XYZ, please let us know and we'll try to make it happen. We really appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe. Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.